Texas, the Georgia Baptist Mission Board Discipleship team, led by Scott Sullivan, exists to help churches take the next step toward becoming a healthy, disciple-making church. We've developed tools to help you, like the WATERSHED principle, which identifies 6 main ministries needed to be a healthy church. The Spark Conference, a total church strengthening event that allows you to access keynotes and breakouts all year long for ongoing training in your ministry area. This year's conference features keynote speakers Fred Luter, Michael Catt, Todd Bolsinger, and Robbie Gallaty, as well as online and in-person regional events. Learn more at www.thesparkconference.com. We also have learning communities across Georgia to sharpen, encourage, and resource leaders personally and professionally. Find a community near you at gabaptist.org/discipleship. Don't forget you can find our previous episodes on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and your favorite podcast platform. Now let's join today's broadcast or podcast.
Welcome to our Georgia Baptist Discipleship family, and you picked a great day to listen in because Brandon Guindon is with us alongside PJ Dunn, and I want to encourage you to make sure that you listen to the end today because I'm going to be sharing with you what I believe is the most important lesson that I have ever learned as a disciple and as a dad. And we have Brandon Guindon with us. He's led churches worldwide to become healthy, effective in disciple making for Jesus. And he was ordained at Real Life Ministries in Post Fall, Idaho. He planted Real Life Ministries in Texas in 2016. He's authored and co-authored several publications on biblical discipleship, including Disciple Making Culture, which is a book that we'll be diving into today. Another one called Stay the Course, and the Real Life Discipleship Training Manual, which many of you have been through. So he and his wife, Amber, have multiple children, been married for 20 years, and we're just super excited. And probably the thing that's making him one of my most favorite people in the world is that he's a bow hunter and avid outdoorsman. Maybe he'll tell us a little bit about that. PJ Dunn's also with us. He's our discipleship consultant for our northern regions here in Georgia and has a passion for discipleship, disciple making, and specifically in the area of single adult disciple making. He's the president of Table for One Ministries. In addition to being one of our full-time consultants, PJ is an author, a speaker, a content creator, IT specialist, and a close, trusted friend. Now, fun fact about PJ, because many of you guys have been watching this, he plays the sousaphone, which I literally had to go Google search because I don't even know what that is. But apparently you have to be super awesome to be able to play that because you play it and you walk. So PJ, you're one of those guys who's dancing and playing in the marching band. Is that the deal?
I am, yeah, and I just draw a lot of attention to myself in the back, and you have to be a certain stature to even hold a sousaphone. So that just says a lot in itself. But that was a lot of fun a lifetime ago.
Oh my gosh! Now, Brandon, tell me real quick your favorite hunting experience.
Wow, my favorite hunting experience was probably in 2011, bow hunting with my dad and I. Together, we called in a bull elk together that was the biggest bull I've ever taken with a bow, and it was just an incredible day. We were fighting a lot of weather elements, and it was just a kind of a teamwork thing that we did, and I ended up taking that bull at 7 yards with my bow, and it ended up being quite an ordeal. When we were packing him out, we had to deal with some wolves, and that was interesting. That got intense, and it was quite a story. He and I still reminisce on how that whole day unfolded, and that was probably one of my greatest of all times. So
wow, that's fantastic. Sounds a lot like the local church. Big win immediately followed by wolves coming after you.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, now that we've alienated the majority of our audience today because we talked about hunting, let me remind our audience that our team has resources to give away. And if you leave a comment, you'll get entered into a $50 gift card and a book, or maybe multiple books. And if you share today's broadcast, you'll get double entry into the giveaway. And PJ Dunn just may give you a role in his new, slightly anticipated documentary entitled Scott Destroyed My Life by Moving Me to Georgia the Day the Pandemic Began.
It's still
PJ
being
Dunn.
written. Yeah, it's still being written. It's a fun one.
There you go. Kick us off, bro.
Oh man, that is quite the intro. Thank you, Scott. And I want to dive in. So disciple making culture, we read as a team of consultants, different books, and we dive into them, and we really want to see what the Lord is saying, like what we're hearing in the local church, and then how that can be relevant. And so when we were talking about this one, my heart just lit up. And it's interesting how you can read different books and different people will be like, man, that one really resonated with me. Well, the team knows. Like we were reading this and I got excited from the get-go because Brandon really unpacks just the highest aim in scripture is love. And he kicks off this whole culture, this idea of culture with love, and that love must be the defining characteristic in a church culture. And that's extremely hard. Like we can just say that, but there's not really a curriculum that just fixes that problem. It's a lot more holistic of an issue. And we're going to kind of talk about that today. But in the book, one of my favorite quotes, and I've been blessed to be able to preach a lot in the last 2 years, all around Southwest Georgia and some in North Georgia now. But I say this quote often a lot, that without love, your ministry efforts are worthless. And it's just a gut punch to the local church that does a lot of things that keeps us busy. But if we don't do them with love, those efforts are worthless. And just kind of diving into that, Brandon, I just want to know, why is love the core starting place of your efforts to create a disciple making culture? Why did you pick that unique starting spot?
Well, I think we've got to go back to, I think if we're going to build a culture within the church, a disciple making culture, we have to go and we are imitating Christ, as Paul tells and commends the Corinthian or the church in Thessalonica that they had imitated them as they had imitated Christ. This principle of imitation is core at disciple making. And so if we look at the concept of love, we go to look at God's heart for mankind, and Jesus is our example. He is the greatest disciple maker to ever walk the face of the earth. His model is the standard of who he is. And so why this book is at the core of the whole motivation of disciple making. It is the end, to me, it is the end goal of spiritual maturity, that a person grows in their spiritual maturity, not because of their knowledge, it's because of their love for God and love for others. And so love is at the core of who Jesus Christ is. And so that is our starting point. When we take the verse that we all know, for God so loved the world that he gave, right? His motivation, if you would say his value, what God values is love. He loves his kids. The motivation for him sending his son was love. Everything that Jesus did, even in saying the hard things, challenging the Pharisees, confronting his disciples, everything was done from this position of love. And so I thought when we sat down to write this book, and I was processing it and even talking about it with my team, is when Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment? And he says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and body. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus's response to the question of what is most important, his response is to love God and love each other. And he doesn't separate those two things. The two things are intimately woven together, loving God and loving each other. The crowd asked, or the lawyer that asked him, he asked, what's the greatest? And Jesus doesn't give one, he gives two commandments, I believe intentionally, because God doesn't separate those things. So if we're going to talk about a culture and building a culture of disciple making, you had better start at the principle of love, because it's at the core of who God is. It's at the core of what he values. It's at the core of what the church should exhibit.
Yeah. Wow. And Paul Miller says it this way, that love is highly inefficient and highly effective in his book. And it really is like the reason we don't do this, and the reason it's number one, is because it's hard. Like it's really hard to love God and love others and honor him and be God's love. And so like I use that 1 John 4 passage, right? Like the only way we're going to know God's love is if we are God's love to one another, right? And that's like a hard challenge. That's a hard charge. It'd be much easier if I just had to go to a small group and just do my Bible study and say it's just knowledge, but that love characteristic is hard to obtain. Why do you think that's such a hard place, and why we put it further down the list of things for disciple making, and you put it number one?
Well, I think the principle, I think you got to look at it and ask about how it's defined. So I think the major mistake that the church is making, and I'm watching it happen all around us, is we've changed the definition. Love equals acceptance. Well, sometimes that's not what love means. Love in the sense of agape love is about about service and self-sacrifice. It's about dying to self. It's about caring for that person. Well, sometimes that may mean saying really hard things to someone. Sometimes the most loving thing that we could ever do is confront the sin in a person's life, not from a place of being judgmental, because we're all broken. But if I love somebody, I need to say hard truth to them. And we've changed these definitions in the culture, and it's caused, to me, this huge mess. And so we have to get back to a biblical definition and understand that it is important, and to know it is hard to love each other. It is hard because we've battled a sin nature. We battle a culture around us all the time, that meaning the greater human race, that we're always trying to, because of sin, drift away from the things of God, where definitions are being changed, and expectations that we have. Instead of going, no, Jesus is the plumb line. The word of God is our plumb line. What does it say, and how did God define it? Jesus said hard things to his disciples. He challenged them. He said hard things to people. He didn't accept everything and be accepting. He was loving. And that meant at times to say, hey, to go and sin no more. But also to love people that were marginalized, and to be there for them and care for them, and to notice them and pay attention to them. And so I think Jesus is, I say it all the time, is he is our model. He's who we are to be imitating. And so I think, yeah, it was hard. It was incredibly hard for him in a sense, in the human side of Jesus, to love his disciples. They were knuckleheads at times, but he demonstrated that he did.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, that's good. And I want to Lego onto PJ's questions for just a second, because I've learned that here recently that there's some things in life that can only be pulled and not pushed, like muscles, gravity, my 8-month-old party Yorkie on a leash trying to make her walk. You can pull her, but you can't push her. You can't make her do anything. But in your book, you had a quote, and it said, "A loving culture does not require us to solve everyone's problems." Can you unpack that for just a moment? Because I really think there's gold for us to mine out of that statement.
Yeah, I think that we have bought into a idea that it's our job to fix everybody. Discipleship is about me fixing you, correcting you in your sin. One of the things that we talk a lot about is there's God's part, there's my part, and there's their part. God asks me to do my part, and my part is to sit with somebody that's really hurting. My part might be to challenge them with the truth. But at the end of the day, I can't fix them. If we were all to be honest and ask ourselves, have you ever fixed anyone? The answer is no. We don't have that ability. Now, the Holy Spirit can. That's what he does. That's his part. So what often happens with people, it happens in our marriages, it happens, in these discipling relationships, is we listen to people with the intent to respond. And so I'm going to listen to you so that I respond in a way where I'm going to tell you whether you're right or wrong, or what you need to do. So really your question is about me and me feeling good about me. That's not what discipleship is about. Discipleship is about me walking alongside you to help guide or lead you to a deeper understanding of who God is. Well, I can't do that unless I listen with the intent to understand you. And that's very different than listening with the intent to respond. I want to understand because I want to know your story. I want to know what you do struggle with. I want to know what your hopes and dreams are. I want to know what God's doing in your life. I want to understand where you're coming from, so that I can better help lead or guide you, do my part to to help you in your walk with Christ. When you think about it, I think, Jesus asked like 307 questions. I mean, when you go follow what he did, he modeled this constant listening to the people around him, and he asked questions to understand them. He was God. He didn't have to do that. Is God, but he did it because he was modeling something. He was modeling something relationally. And so I think, to your point about this question is to realize I can't fix anybody. That's a false belief. My job is to point them to the one that can fix them. And I best do that by listening to understand them. And when I do, I can come alongside and do my part well. They have to do their part, but I know that God's going to do his part 100% of the time.
Yeah.
So those are some of the kind of fundamental things that I think I've learned from the scriptures and watching closely in the scriptures of what Jesus did with his 12.
I agree with you, Brandon. And that is, for me, that is liberating, that I'm not responsible for their decisions, good or bad. That God does his part, I do my part, they have their part. Fantastic. PJ?
Gosh, yeah. And I was like, ministry is messy. And so I've spent 15 years local ministry, and there's just been so many people that come to mind as you're talking where we're like, I have the answer, just do it. Right. But I can't make them do it. Nobody could do that for me. And I was stubborn, and I had to, the Lord had to work in my heart, but I needed somebody to guide me in that direction. And that's a big part of loving people. And that takes time. And so often we want like a quick fix to our culture issue, where we say, well, we'll just love everybody because we're down in the South. And so we do potlucks, we're happy, we're friendly, we shake hands, everything's nice, right? But that's not the kind of love that we're talking about. We're talking about the love that goes beyond and is at their house at midnight when they're having depression that is so deep they don't know how to process it. And that takes hours, and you don't get sleep and they don't get sleep, but their life has changed for it. And until you've invested that way in somebody, and just you want so badly for it to change, and you pray and you say, God, I need you to do this. But at the end of the day, we can only reach out, and that person has to take the next step and reach back, and they have to say, okay, I'm going to be loved by God in this way. And so many issues to unpack that really resolve around that. I can't solve everybody's problems in local ministry. So when you say it's liberating, like that was that moment for me. When I was in high school, and I had a friend who was getting married, and I'm like, you don't need to be getting married. Like, you're marrying this girl. I don't even know why you're marrying this girl. It's not going to work. So I tell him you're not going to do it. We get all the way to the wedding day. Are you going to be there? And I'm like, man, I'll be here to support you. But like, I really don't think this is a great idea. 13 months later, they're divorced. Right. And they become another statistic. And I remember thinking, how is it possible that you had all the answers in front of you and still chose to do something else? And I knew that was a bad choice. And I remember just thinking, that's because it's not all about you, PJ. Like, the Holy Spirit has to be involved. It's not just truth, but it's truth and love. It's not just saying that that's the way that God wants us to act, but praying, Lord, let the Spirit stir in their lives so that they would follow you and act more like you. So you really got me riled up, Brandon. And there's a reason I'm fanboying right now over this book, as you can tell. So let me ask both of you this question. Scott, I'll ask you first. In what ways have you seen a culture of disciple making create a lasting impact? You've served in local ministry for a long time. And so how do you see that lasting impact of a culture of disciple making happen?
Yeah, one I would say legacy, that it lives beyond your ministry. I've always wanted to, when I go to a place, and fortunately the Lord's allowed me to be places long-term. I was in one full-time position 10 years. And then the latest one, I was there 16 years before coming to Georgia. But given something, pouring your heart into something that is that kingdom impact legacy. And I think about a guy named Blake Lewis, came through the ministry, went to college, served some part-time places. We hired him full-time as our middle school minister, and he's still serving. And he got his master's while I was there. And this time next year, maybe a year and a half, he'll be finishing with his doctorate and will be one of the most impactful student ministry voices in the nation. Well, he came through that ministry and even developed what we have from an overarching perspective plan to something that was the same language, but focused on the students. So when you come to that church, there is a plan that he can present to those parents to say, here's what we want for your child to look like when they graduate, and here's the process they're going to go through. Teresa Small in the children's ministry did the same thing. So that's one way that I've seen just having a specific intentional plan works. Another work that I would say value, giving your church members something to give their life to that has eternal impact. And because so many people are waking up and they're like feeling, maybe those of you are watching, maybe you're even feeling like this right now. Like there's got to be more to this life than what I'm living. I feel like I was made for more than what is going on here. Well, living out the life of a disciple and a disciple maker is that thing that a person can say, hey, this is what I was made for. And the third thing I would say is attractional. And you don't want to take this too far, because obviously the goal of disciple making is not to be attractional, but it is super helpful when people in your ministry area know who you are and what you're about. Like if you give them a biblical goal of making mature disciples that replicate, and you have a clear plan in place for all your members to get there from cradle to grave, that's huge.
Yeah. Brandon, same question to you, right? And I know you've kind of had a unique perspective of this, working with Jim and now and planting and going around the world and doing those things, because you want to create this culture of disciple making everywhere that you go. So just tell us, like, how does it stick around? How does it have a lasting impact?
Yeah, I think the first place that I would start is to everybody that's listening, is the starting place is with you, is to look in the mirror and to ask hard questions, to ask yourself, am I obediently living out the Great Commission? We again, in the church, we've adopted this idea. We've even somewhat promoted it or allowed it in the church, is that accomplishing the Great Commission is optional. It's not optional. It is what Jesus, the King of the universe, gave to his people that call themselves his disciples to go and accomplish, and to ask ourselves, am I living this out with my life? Have I committed my life to it? No matter what I do for an occupation, this isn't just, he didn't just say, well, all the clergy that are going to be part of the church are going to go accomplish. No, it's to every person that is a disciple of Jesus was given this Great Commission. And so it has to start with you as a lifestyle. And I watch a lot of times pastors will kind of want to jump over and go right to the strategic, how do I implement this as in my church? And that's a valid question, but you cannot pass by the question for yourself. Am I living this out? And I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversation with pastors that have said to me, I've never been discipled and I don't know how to make a disciple. And I would say, awesome. I'm glad that you see it and that you recognize it. Okay, let's start working on it, because there's great resources out there. One of the things that I'm part of is the RDN, the Relational Discipleship Network. And we help and equip churches to do that through the network. And there's other things that, I'm hopeful in the book to point them in that direction. But I can't use it as an excuse. I have to go after it and learn how to do this. And so to make a lasting impact, it has to start with the leaders, the people that are leading in the church. Because, my friend Jim Putman says all the time, as the head goes, the body follows. That is true.
Yes.
If you're expecting your church to be a disciple-making church, but none of the elders, none of the staff, the senior pastor especially, is not actually making disciples, it's going to happen at a unintentional, weak level at best in your church. And so I think to have a lasting impact, it needs to start there, and it needs to be part of the culture that this is not an option. And I have people leave our church because I've literally had people say to me, look, I just want to show up and get my Jesus fix and go home. Well, the last time I, looked at this, I didn't know that Jesus was a drug. And, that's not what he came to this earth and died for, is so that you can get a fix. Yeah. This is a mission that we're called to as his people. And so to help creating within the culture for a lasting impact, it has to start with you. It has to be something we're committed to for life. And it's going, you said it earlier, it's messy with people. You got to change your expectations. If you think this is this great and wonderful and easy and this is going to make everything fantastic, you've been sold a bill of goods. The more you walk down this narrow ancient path that Jesus modeled, it's going to be hard, messy. You're going to get involved in people's lives. They're going to quit. They're going to walk away. It's hard. It's part of it.
Yeah, and every once in a while you get a Judas in there too, right? When you're disciple making, and you never know, and that hurts us. And so then when we get wounded, it's harder to go back out because we go, well, that one kind of hurt, right? And you said it this way in the book, right? Strategy won't make a lasting impact if disciple making is not who we are. And one of the great things that we do here in Georgia is that through the cooperative program with our churches, we are funded, and with that we can go move the needle in discipleship. And so a lot of times it's learning from our 3,600 churches and going out there and doing that. But at the consultant level, we're in the field, we're with pastors, because we do want to see that lasting impact, right? Because we don't want to just give a strategy and say, well, I hope that works, I'll check in with you next year. Like we want to help show you and model that too. Like this is what it looks like to have a long-term relationship. This is and it's hard because you just like the local church, you're going to say, man, I just wish I had more people. If I had more staff, if I could pay more people, if I could do more things, then we'd get there. But the reality is, even in the local church, that's not really the issue. The issue is culture. And we have to have this culture of disciple making. Otherwise we just don't focus on it. Right, Scott?
That's good. That's good. I tell you, one thing that I want to highlight right here, Brandon, because you said something that I really think is worth repeating, because disciple making is not easier and it's not less messy, but it is more impactful. Because we have a lot of leaders that are like, we're not having to convince them that being a disciple maker and setting up disciple making systems is what we've got to do. But we do have a lot of them that aren't doing it and they don't know where to start. And we want to make sure that we're sharing the correct message, that it's not easier and it's not less messy, but it is more impactful. That is a thing that you can give your life to that is biblical. So well spoken, Brandon. Now, you're writing your book that creating a disciple-making culture requires careful pruning. Of course, I read John 15. That's one of my favorite passages about how the master gardener prunes his people. And so my question for you is, how do pastors and disciple makers that may be watching or listening, how do they do that in terms of pruning, the people and the processes? Help us understand that a little better.
Okay. I think I would go back to a point you were just making, in the churches that are all listening, and it's to start at this place, to understand what is the win. For some that think, well, I have to have this church of 100, 500, 1,000, 10,000, whatever that it is, I would really challenge that notion and to say, hold on a second. You're called to accomplish the Great Commission and to go and make disciples and to do that well and to do your part. Sometimes some of the best disciple makers that I've ever met in my life are pastoring a church of 120, and they're in a little community and they're doing the best that they can. And they're discipling 5 or 6 or 7 guys really, really well. And so I just would challenge or encourage churches to really evaluate that win, and what is that win, because that helps you understand, well, what is it that I'm pruning? If I know what my goal is and what I'm trying to accomplish, then I can look at it and go, well, what's getting in the way of that? Is my schedule so filled with a bunch of stuff that doesn't help facilitate disciple making that I need to clean up or cut away? I put this in the book. One of my staff, Judy Cintron, she says this statement all the time: are you interruptible? Because if you're going to be the disciple maker, you're going to be interrupted. Are you interruptible? If somebody says, I really need help, I want to be invested in, can you do that? So if I know what the win is and what I'm trying to build in this culture and disciple people, then I start cutting away the things that just don't produce that. Asking yourself, is this just a life drain on me? Why am I doing this? Is it a sacred cow in my life that we're doing it? Are there things in our church that we're doing when we're doing them because we've done them forever and we're afraid to cut them? I would just put on the lenses of being a disciple maker and asking hard questions. What is the win? At the end of the day, what am I held accountable for? And start to, take the time to make those adjustments. And I would encourage you, don't swing the pendulum and cut everything, and be careful of that. Do it with wisdom and over time, seek wise counsel. But You got to know the when and where you're going and start trimming away the things that take away or drain from that greater mission.
Hmm.
This is where my head was on this question. It was like, we have to measure to scripture, not programs. And that's really hard to say, because we know we instill strategies and programs to help us achieve what scripture is measuring. But when we forget, like, are you exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit? When we forget how to love each other, like 1 Corinthians 13, when we forget that we need to be God's love to everybody, like 1 John 4, like those core principles of loving aren't always going to show up in a program. And so, yes, we do VBS, but that doesn't mean we do VBS with those core measures. So did VBS exhibit 1 Corinthians 13? Is it 1 John 4? Is it being God's love to the community? Because we've heard the debate for years, like, why do we do trunk or treat, and everybody's got like a spirited reason for why they do trunk or treat. But for me, it's always been because we get to be God's love. We get to throw out some candy and we get to say, hey, this is God's love to the community. And that may not show up in some of these other categories that are programs, but it does show up in being God's love. And I'm going to get some hate mail. So I can see it coming up in the group chats right now. And so I also use the word Halloween on a broadcast. So don't fire me, Scott.
That's so great.
But yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. And now, Brandon, one of the key things that really we talk about a lot on here is that program driven versus disciple making as a process, as a personal endeavor. Just maybe real quick, what would you say to the leaders who are going to be watching that grew up like I did in a programmatic approach, but they're hearing you talking about disciple making and they've maybe looked at some of the real life discipleship processes and what it takes there? What would you say to those leaders in terms of where to start if they want to make this shift to really be Great Commission believers, disciples who create that in their churches in terms of a culture?
Yeah, I not to sound too repetitive, but I would start with yourself and the immediate people that are around you. Start discipling a group of men or women that are immediately around you. Take and go through the disciple making culture book together. We call it the white workbook, the Real Life Discipleship Training Manual. Take a group of people and go through that, and just start in your own living room. Start in a coffee shop nearby, where you're starting to disciple and to live it out. Programs in and of themselves are not necessarily a bad thing. There's a few programs that we do here in our church, but they all have the end goal in mind. We are going to funnel people into discipling relationships. That's what they lead to. And so to being able to look at some of what you do programmatically and go, does that lead people into a discipling relational environment where they can be discipled? If it doesn't, then either adjust the program or cut it of how you move people in. And so ask those critical thinking questions. And I want to put this on because I think it's important. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul says there at the end of chapter 2, he says, what do we have to brag about? At the end of everything that we've done, what do we have to brag about? And he says, is it not you? Are you not our crown? That chapter, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, is so filled with the principle of disciple making. And he concludes it with, the people are our crown, our joy, our glory. That's the only thing we have to brag about. And so to ask yourself, to look at it and go, when this is all done and I stand before the Lord, and he called me to be obedient to his great commission, have I invested in the people around me? Have I raised people up to be strong disciples of Jesus Christ? It has to start with me. Beyond any program, beyond any sermon that you preach, beyond any of those things, are you making disciples?
Yeah, well, and at the risk of what Bill Hall said, being a publicist, I do want to plug your book for that reason. And so the staying the course, it really is like a practices and a principles and like this is how to really stay in the game long term on the things that you're talking about. Because the disciple makers that are watching today, pastors that are watching today, we get fired up at a conference. We get fired up at one of these kind of things. And then before we know it, 6 months passed and nothing changed. Or we started a program And I was just talking to a leader last night, and he said, I started these ministry teams last year and they fizzled out, and they didn't do it. Like, staying the course is the hard thing. Like, starting sometimes isn't as much the issue in the local church as are we doing it in year 3. So I like that you have that booklet available. That's something that we'll put in the chat as well and go from there. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I tell you what, let me just mention here as well, as we begin to land the drone here for this broadcast, our team has learning communities spread out all over Georgia. And if you're in a different state or a different country and you'd love to connect with others, if you'll drop something in the chat, we'll try to help you connect with the right people as well. But they exist to help you with what Brandon was just talking about, that idea of where to start. How do we make this shift? What is my next step as a disciple, as a disciple maker, in leading my church to become a disciple making church? That's one of the things I love about this book. So Brandon, PJ, thank you guys for just this discussion today, for helping our Georgia Baptist Discipleship tribe. And as we conclude this, I want to leave you with a thought. Just drill down with a thought that I heard Brandon say just now, because he talked about how loving Jesus and others needs to be that starting point. And my 11-year-old son, Caleb, was in an accident early March where he broke both bones in his dominant arm, creating this open wound. He's an elite athlete. And for that experience, it was pretty devastating. Infection set in the bone. We spent 13 nights at the Children's Hospital in Atlanta. And when it happened, I get in my truck, I run up there, carefully put him in the truck. And for about 40 minutes, I heard him calling out, "Help me, Jesus. Please help me, Jesus. Please, please help me, Jesus." Over and over and over, like so much so that it's still, those words ring in my ears and it wakes me up at night. Well, on that ride to the ER, Caleb reached between my ridge cable and my arm, and then he was asking to hold my hand. So I reached back with my left hand and his good hand, and I'm just holding it, and I'm telling him, "Daddy's here now. I got you, Caleb. I got you, and everything's going to be okay." In that moment, which was more important, what I could do for Caleb or simply my presence? You see, it was the presence of the Father that gave him the courage and the confidence and the comfort that he needed to know he could get through that excruciating experience. You see, friends, on this broadcast, we talk a lot about X's and O's, strategy and process, but at the basic level, like Brandon just said, the most important element of your walk as a disciple and disciple maker is this lesson to learn. I must learn to be with Jesus before I seek to do for Jesus and expect from Jesus. That's the greatest lesson perhaps that I have learned as an adult, as a disciple and disciple maker, because being with Jesus gives us the confidence and the authority that everything else is going to be possible. Brandon, PJ, love you guys. Thanks for jumping on. Y'all are just a home run duo. Lana Melton, John Graham, thanks for producing. And I want to remind our listeners that we are only able to do this broadcast because you give generously to the cooperative program. So thanks for doing that. And I pray that today's discussion with Brandon Guindon and PJ Dunn will equip and inspire you to make world impacting disciples.
Thanks for listening. We want to continue the conversation from today's broadcast in a learning community near you. These learning communities are designed to celebrate your biggest wins, resource your greatest need, and help you finish well. We also want to give you a free gift, the 5 discipleship shifts most churches need to make to produce world-impacting disciple makers. You can download this resource by going to ministryboom.com. This 5-page PDF is a discipleship alignment checklist. The Georgia Baptist Mission Board is able to provide resources like this because of gifts from Georgia Baptists to the cooperative program. For more information on this broadcast and a customized discipleship plan for your church, visit gabaptist.org/discipleship. Engage with us on your time through Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and all podcast platforms. Lastly, if you've benefited from this conversation today, please share this with a friend as we seek to help churches make world-impacting disciple makers.